So, with all the discussion that's been going on about the minimum wage and how it was first added to the COVID relief bill and then taken out by 8 Democratic caucusing senators, and of course 50 Republicans, we there's just been so much discussion over the benefits and the drawbacks of, say, a $15 minimum wage. So I'm going to cover that and also the potential alternatives to that if you want to raise wages for lower income workers. So first of all, of course, the minimum wage proposed by progressives and supposedly the Biden administration is $15 per hour. And it really would have a lot of economic impacts. So this wage would raise over 900,000 people out of poverty. It would um, increase wages for about 32 million workers. And it would also cost 1.4 million jobs. So that last bit is where we hear conservatives that's their main talking point. Like, oh, it's going to hurt small businesses because they're already struggling to make it with the wages that they pay now. But first of all, it's a gradual increase. Just want to say that. It's going to be, it would be, the proposed increases over like 4 years. I think it should be shorter, but I digress. And so it's a long run thing. So it actually protects businesses in the short run. But again, I'm digressing a little bit. So the main reason why 1.4 million jobs would be lost is because part-time jobs would turn into full-time jobs. Instead of a person making $7.25, working 60 hours a week, working 2 different jobs, they would be making $15 at one job. So businesses, small businesses in particular, may hire fewer workers, but those workers would be working full-time. So there's that. And then there's the idea that also still that small businesses would hurt. And again, this would be subsidized by the increased in minimum wage. Here's how it is. So since it's a gradual increase, it's you wouldn't see going from 7 to 25 and 15 in a day. It's because it's a gradual increase. It gives small businesses time to plan ahead with their hiring efforts, with their potential price increases and such like that. So it gives time for them time to plan ahead, and if they can't plan ahead, then maybe they shouldn't be a business in the first place. But when people have more money in their pockets, they are more likely to go out and spend that money into, say, small businesses. They're going to eat out, go see a movie, or and such like that. So it will be subsidizing itself through the demand side of economics. So this is why it's actually a good idea. Not to mention, it will raise, again, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people out of poverty and raise the wages of, a tenth of the country. So there's also an anecdotal case here. So in Fresno, California, it's a more rural area, low wage area, but they had to deal with the California minimum wage being raised to $14 an hour. So we saw, maybe the issues presented from the right, here. So, for example, a locally owned restaurant is struggling to pay their workers since the increase in the wage, and the owner had to, let some people go. But again, workers are able to spend more with their greater disposable income, growing businesses like these in the long run. So, business owners in Fresno were also having to cut costs elsewhere, like raising prices for their goods, which again, not again, but these price increases are only a few cents. They really don't discourage much spending. Um, and so like this, but despite all the issues, you know, with laying off the workers and having to cut costs other places and the raise in prices, it still increased employment in this in Fresno, than the rest of California had a greater employment rate. So um, this relates to the national debate, in like, say, you know, a living wage in Wyoming may be like $12 an hour, for a single person not raising a child, versus like in San Francisco or New York it could be like 30. So if you set the base, if you set the floor at 15, um, it can actually be very good, because guess what? The living wage in Wyoming, it may be like, you know, 12.50 for a single person, but for raising a child it's at least $25 an hour, and that is for everywhere. You look at every rural county through the minimum wage calculator from MIT, and you see the bare minimum is about like 12.50 an hour for a single person not raising any kids. Once you put that kid in there, oh my gosh, the living wage goes way up. Um, so $15 is a compromise. It's a floor. The actual living wage, if it kept up with inflation and productivity, could be closer to actually $24 an hour, studies find. So, because since about 1973, wages have not been keeping up with productivity for the longest time, for, you know, since like towards the end of the Great Depression, and you know, the end of the Vietnam War. We saw wages keep up with productivity. The economy was growing very steadily, and then some crazy policies introduced by Nixon and Ford led our economy into stagflation, which Jimmy Carter couldn't handle because no economist had ever seen it. But again, I digress. Um, but let me turn the page a little bit. So going back to maybe some other uh, uh, things here, some other proposals that could raise wages. So there's also the earned income tax credit, which basically doesn't subsidize wages, but it gives a tax credit to people earning wages up until the poverty line. But once they hit the poverty line, that benefit decreases. Um, and so that actually discourages workers, disincentivizes workers to work longer hours once they hit the poverty line, which, you know, is it's not good for the economy. If you're working longer hours, then you're making more money, and that's more disposable income you can have to spend in other places in the economy. So there's the downside of the earned income tax credit. I already discussed all the potential downsides to the minimum wage, but those have been largely debunked. Um, and but here, another alternative is a proposed wage subsidy. So basically, the government would pay low-income workers an additional couple bucks an hour. So say someone's working, you know, maybe like $10 an hour, they would be like, all right, we'll give you another $5 an hour. The government's paying for this. And so, although this doesn't really have the same downsides to, you know, the earned income tax credit or the minimum wage as we discussed, it's actually it does have some downsides in the long run, and I'll explain why the minimum wage increase is still better in the long run. So, like, the wage subsidy is a good way to raise wages, but with minimum wage increase, um, this it's setting this wage floor for so-called unskilled labor actually raises the wages for skilled labor, because you know, skilled labor would then have to pay higher wages to compete with um, the utility gained from, say, unskilled labor. But okay, I don't like these terms very much because unskilled labor isn't really doesn't really exist. All labor requires some skill um, and experience. It's just, especially when you're talking about productivity and efficiency. Um, and so it's really just been a word used to keep wages low. Um, anyway, again, I digress. And so, you know, it this type of the minimum wage increase actually incentivizes people to then still go get an education and get skilled, um, uh, to get those higher wages, which again, looking at the demand side, will pump way more money into the economy. So that's something that the wage subsidy proposal does not do. It does not increase wages of all workers in the long run because there's still no floor. It's just subsidizing some wages. That's all it is. It's very similar to the earned income tax rate. It's basically a mix between the EITC and the minimum wage increase. So there's that. But then, you know, I want to also talk about universal basic income. So universal basic income is an incredibly good idea, and it's shown empirically in a study through in California. So a section of California, I can't remember where, but they did a little trial run with universal basic income. And so one of the criticisms of this is that, well, if you give people an income, they're going a basic income, they're going to be disincentivized to work. They're not going to get out there and work in the market if they're just going to, you know, get an income anyway. The study actually found that the opposite was true. So giving people a cushion actually made them more incentivized to go out and find higher paying jobs, because instead of, you know, needing to find the first job that they can find and then being unhappy and getting paid a low wage, they're given a cushion so they can spend a little more time and effort looking for a better job. So with increased automation, as Andrew Yang loves to point out, or loved to when he was running for president, uh, this is absolutely needed because those lower wage jobs won't be here very soon. And so we need to give people a cushion so that they can get experience, education, and to actually go out and find a better job. And this study in California completely reflects that and debunks any um, downside to universal basic income. And you know, Alaska, a red state, has had a form of UBI for a long time, and they haven't seen any massive decrease of in employment or anything like that. It's only benefited the economy from the demand side. So you know, this is all really interesting stuff, and I really hope that we see you know, politicians actually make the effort now to get these policies through, because there's only a benefit. There's only a benefit. There's no downside to these policies anymore.